following message is transmitted.
All right, welcome back to the Order of Chaos podcast. Today, my guest is Marshall, the Witch of Southern Light. Marshall, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
This episode of the Order of Chaos podcast is brought to you by the Mystic Raven, owned and operated by one of our very own graduates. The Mystic Raven is your one-stop shop for all your occult and ritual needs. It's where I buy everything for my practice. My favorite item that I've purchased is this journal, which is where I do all my sigil work. The Mystic Raven stocks thousands of items, everything you need from candles to journals to ritual supplies from various practices. It is a very, very well-stocked store owned and operated by an actual practicing witch. I really can't recommend it enough. And for those of you who join the Order of Chaos Mystery School, you get 10% off. So once again, this episode is brought to you by the Mystic Raven. Links to the Mystic Raven will be in the description, and check it out. It's an amazing store. It's got everything you need. I really can't recommend it enough. You and I have been interacting through comments for a long time, and then we never really got to have a conversation. So I'm really excited to do this. I do have a few announcements before we get going. Firstly, Marshall, you're going to be one of our guest instructors at the Order of Chaos Mystery School Living Witchcraft program for July. So that is very, very exciting. If you have not enrolled yet, you still have time. Class starts this Friday. Merch is coming back, so keep an eye out for that. And if this episode is publishing on Monday, as it's supposed to, and you would like to join us tonight for a free masterclass on ritual technique within the paradigm of chaos magic, that link will be in the description. All right, all that being said, Marshall, thank you so much for being here. This is awesome. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I've actually been listening to your podcast as well. Ivy Corvus was the one who got me into it, and I really like listening to your conversations. I feel like conversational podcasts are so much more something I feel like I can fall into sometimes. It feels so real. It feels so like I want to jump in on the conversation, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can't. I'm driving in my car and I'm listening to something pre-recorded.
Yeah, you know what? Exactly what you just said is the reason I got into podcasting in the first place. Is that I love that. I love exactly that. You're listening to two interesting people have a conversation, and it's not scripted. Because then I'll come across a scripted podcast and I lose interest immediately, even if it's a topic I'm really into. If I can tell that there's a scripted back and forth happening that's supposed to seem natural, that is such a turnoff for me.
Yeah. Because I have a podcast as well. And if you're listening, I just want to throw this a little shout out. I do a podcast called Southern Bramble, a podcast of crooked ways with Austin, Banix Bramble on Instagram. We've been going about 4 years, and it's funny, like we'll put these loose outlines together and maybe just some facts or background information so I have it at my fingertips. But yeah, the conversation that takes over becomes so much deeper. And personally, I think when we're talking about magic, witchcraft, the occult, it's got to be more than surface. I mean, there is a level of keeping what's private, but there's for yourself, for your personal practice, but there's also the aspect of the things that we can share, the things that we do share, the things that we actually end up kind of sometimes end up inadvertently validating within each other, because then when we have these conversations, we're like, oh my God, I had a similar experience. Yes. And it gives you that sense of like, there is something so much bigger than just the individual. I do practice solitary witchcraft. I'm a traditional folkloric witch living in Texas. I'm queer as fuck, and I live in a great neighborhood. But there's also the communal aspect of our spirits, our witch ancestors, and our living future witch ancestors, which we interact with on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that I absolutely adore about your book.
Please. Oh, yes. Thank you. I did write a book.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to tell people about your book and where they
I wrote a book. It's called Cunning Words, a grimoire of tales and magic. I'm showing the paperback right here for people who can see. It was a absolute labor of love. It is a collection of stories that teach magic in the narrative form. Historically, there is an aspect of something called historiola that creates folklore, stories, mythos, oral stories, bardic traditions that we pass down information with.
Yeah.
These tales that teach us lessons, not only about life, but sometimes about magic. I was so inspired by this historiola. I wanted to bring it back into the modern craft. I think so many of us get stuck in that mindset of the four elements and the pinnacle in the center and what is in every single 101 book that keeps getting reiterated for decades at a time. Sometimes there's wonderful new inventions or reintroductions of aspects of the occult that seem to have gotten lost in the zeitgeist. But it was something that was so inspiring to me, and I wanted to bring it to the forefront, not only of my practice, but of the community.
It's yeah, you nailed it. That's so true. And what I keep thinking of when I was reading, no, first of all, I just want to say, like, your book is so good, and I highly recommend it to everybody out there who's listening. It's so good. You
Thank
did the
you.
artwork, you self-published, you wrote the whole thing, and it flows. You know, like I am a person with severe ADHD, and I read your book for 45 straight minutes, which is a goddamn miracle for me, right?
Well,
Because not
I did do
that
something
blocks you
that
from.
yeah, I did that on purpose, actually. There was a way of creating spaces between every single paragraph. Because I'm a neurodivergent reader. If I look at a page of text, I will get lost in it. And
Yeah,
after 3, 4 pages, I'm I'm kind of I'm kind of like checked out or
yeah,
falling asleep.
yeah.
But the breaks, they give you something for your eyes to check off next, next, next. It's really, really wonderful for people who struggle with those walls of text.
Totally. Oh my God. Yeah. So I didn't know you did that intentionally. That's just another thing I adore about the book. Um, but so just when I open it up and there's that map, that to me, because
Ah,
that like spoke to my heart like immediately. Because when I was a kid, I used to make maps. I would design a land and then make a treasure map kind of thing. And I saw that. I'm like, oh my God, this is gonna be so good. And then the way
y-
you tell stories in the book is something that I learned in the last 4 or 5 years. It's become a huge part of my life and my practice. Is just the simple realization that human beings, our lives happen through stories. Our mind is telling stories. Our lives are a story. It's all stories, like all the way up and down. That's how we think. So this is a brilliant way to transmit information.
Thank you. I for one, I love that you mentioned the map. It's funny, actually. The idea came to me when I was rereading Wicked, Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, and I noticed how many times, while actually listening to the story, I would look up and refer to them. I had the hard copy as well. I took a picture of the book. There's a map of all of Oz, and I referred to it so often. And I ended up doing that in some earlier, like, epic tales when I was a teenager that I used to read with a lot of fantasy. And it was so important to see the location of where these things were happening in relation to each other, because the stories they're all kind of all separate, but they all flow into an entire landscape that works in a network of experiences that can impart knowledge. And the map itself gives the reader the opportunity to see where and how this journey seems to take place for all of the spirits within.
Yes. And okay, so as you're saying that, I'm realizing that that's what it does to you, like psychologically. You see the map, and it gives you the connecting principles of all these stories before you get into
Mhm,
the stories, rather than after. Right. And
mhm.
that's so cool. So as you're reading them, you're imagining where they might be on the map. And it reminded me kind of playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is something I really love and miss doing. Just you know, I am a very our mutual friend Ivy.
Mhm.
Ivy and I are very similar in the way that we think and practice magic. We're actually very different, but more similar than anyone else I know. And we're both very textbook oriented people, you know. So like when
Mhm.
I teach in a sort of textbook kind of way. And so it's the opposite of what I do. And that's I think why I appreciate it so much. And it's so inspiring to me.
Thank you. Um, the way that I think a lot of people are reading these stories that I intended and I'm getting feedback for, which gives me such joy, is they tell me it feels like it's grandma telling me a story by the fireplace, like it's
Yeah,
a bedtime story,
it does.
and or like a campfire story, or maybe you're sharing drinks at a pub, and there's, like, I remember traveling to Ireland, in Dublin. We did a tour of learning Irish folk songs with a pub crawl, which was really great. But the way that these stories were told through song and passed down. Sometimes they would sound super cheerful, but if you actually pay attention to the words, they were horrifying or sad and terribly tragic. But because of the way that they stuck with you, they affected you. I personally got emotional writing some of these stories. I put my heart and soul into touching not only other people but my own self, with the connections I was making with these characters. There's three separate characters that are really important to me: the mother in red, the mother in green, and the mother in black.
Mhm.
And they have become almost tutors to me in my craft, as spirits that I feel are teaching me what they have to share, and I get to put it into words.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so regarding the three mothers, when I got to that section of the book, I immediately thought of Santa Muerte, because in Santa Muerte we have the same idea. We have these different garbs that she'll wear that represent different aspects of Santa Muerte. And it's I didn't get through all those sections, but that's just what came to mind. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that, since I only got to read, I think, the first 50 pages.
No, that's totally okay. I was actually really inspired by Gemma Gary's book, The Black Toad, and it had an organizational tool in there that separated up magic into three sections. There was charms and spells, there was herbal healing and herbal lore, and then there was curses, hexes, and bindings.
Mhm.
And they were broken up by Old Mother Red Cap, Old Mother Green Cap, and Old Mother Black Cap. And there's a history there, especially over in Europe and specifically much more in England, with Old Mother Redcap as a name that ended up becoming very popularized for your local cunning woman or charmer or fortune teller. And there's a few stories of actual women that are documented as having worn a little red cap. And that's how this became popularized. But I wanted, when I read these these chapters in Gemma Gary's book, The Black Toad, there was something that just there was something that was like poking me. It was I couldn't figure out what it was. I wanted more, and I reread it over and over and over again, and I was like, there's more here. And something told me, like, if I wanted to see what it was, I was going to have to write it down. And it started with stories, interactions, and it was so strange the way that they would come to me. I do all of my writing on the elliptical. Uh, I will, go to the gym. I'll kind of get into the perfect state. I'll get on the elliptical. I'll put some Lindsey Sterling in my ears, and then I'll I'll start typing. And it's so crazy. Like an hour will go by, the machine will turn off. I'm dripping sweat, and I'm like, "What's happening? What's going on?" And I won't even realize it's been a full hour, because you kind of get in this perpetual motion state where your mind starts to wander and things start to kind of arise out of nowhere. It's hard to describe, but it's a very flow state.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of feel like I transcribe a lot of these stories that are coming to me. A lot of them don't have full outlines when I get started.
Mhm.
I am surprised by the way that they twist and end. Sometimes it's strange, and it's uh, no pun intended. It's very queer.
Yeah, I mean, that flow state is so important to the practice of witchcraft on a whole, I would say.
Mhm.
And to the way I would say this is that altered states of consciousness are incredibly important to your ability to perform magic, because we don't perform magic in the waking state of consciousness. Generally, if we're in beta, we could move over to alpha, which is the creative state. But anytime you get out of beta at all, and that's to say to get into the alpha state or the theta state or even the gamma state, then your perception of reality and your influence on reality are different than they are in the normal waking state of consciousness. So flow state is a perfect example of that, and exercising is a great way to get there. I personally, when I do this podcast, if it's a good episode or when I'm teaching, if I'm having a good day, I don't remember what the fuck I said. I have no idea. I just talked about something that I'm really engaged with, right? Because that engagement is what's really going on. Your brain is engaged rather than analyzing.
Oh, absolutely. It's so crazy. Sometimes you feel like you're gonna sit down and have coffee with a friend, and the conversation just starts to flow. There's a connection between the two of you, and you're sharing thoughts and experiences. And before you know it, it's been an hour, 2 hours. You're like, I should get another coffee.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And that way you just described it there. That's the reason I do this show, right? That was the
Absolutely.
whole idea, was to just have these conversations, because I used to have them with my older brother, and then he's very busy. He's got 2 kids now, and he's married, and we don't even live in the same country anymore. The same thing. I used to have these conversations with my best friend, who we've been friends since we were teenagers, but he's got 3 kids. I've got a child. We're very, very busy. So getting to do this as a job now is the greatest thing in the world, because I get to have these conversations, which were so meaningful to me because they break up the monotony of otherwise mundane reality with something magical, right? And I think that as a person, I've needed that my entire life. Like I know in times in my life when I've been like either depressed or just not doing well, it's because there's no magic flowing in and out of my life. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. When I go too long without being creative, I feel very, very pointless.
Yeah.
I have a job that I love, but it is a very, 9 to 5 situation. It's a very day job. It's
Mhm.
wonderful. I'm passionate about it, but um, it's become the thing that supports me to do more things that I love, and
Yeah.
that's fine. I'm happy with that. Um, but if it starts to become too humdrum, if I'm not creating enough, if I'm not drawing, if I'm not writing, if I'm not um, really kind of, it doesn't necessarily have to be about furthering my craft as much as my craft is about creation in itself.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of my writing involves this interaction with the spirits that I'm working with, who are telling me their stories, or giving me connections that I feel like I am seeing in multiple layers, not only in these stories, but in my own life and my experiences. It's strange because I love that you said earlier, that you said that it flowed together. I didn't write all of these stories in order. I put them in order and the way in which they were naturally supposed to flow after I finished writing all these stories. And it was so crazy to watch them start here and move to here, and then kind of flow into the rest
Yeah.
of them till I finally got to the very last one, and then of course the epilogue. And what's really cool about it is it's not just stories. It's called Cunning Words, a grimoire of tales and magic, because it's 3 parts. There's tales that teach these stories in 13 chapters.
Mhm.
Then there's 13 chapters of rhyme and verse. So this is poetry.
Mhm.
And honestly, this is something that touches my childhood witchy heart,
Mhm.
because when I was younger, I grew up with all these stories and movies of old spell books and rhyming magic and
Yeah.
spells, and the way that everything was delivered was so artistic and creative. And I wanted to give that back. I wanted to see that in our community. And so I got to put 13 chapters of poems. And these poems, they teach you recipes for protection, recipes for using crossroads nails, recipes for working with specific plants like morning glory. They give you an entire, some of the spells, the poetry are spells themselves, like the
Mhm.
Song of the Cicada. It literally is the spell and teaches you within it.
Mhm.
There's an invocation of the old ones in there about petitioning to them. There's even a poem about teaching you about doing a red meal, which is a traditional witchcraft practice of a All Hallows Eve rite, making offerings to your fellow dead. Um, it it gives me that sense of creativity in the magic that when it's delivered back, I feel like I'm reading something that's always existed or is older than what I wrote. I'm not claiming it to be any way, shape, or form. These are all new, but at the same time, there's a touch of oldness to them that I feel just is right.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something that happens with stories,
Hmm.
where the best stories are instantly recognizable by their not by the words, but by the form. So this is akin to the hero's journey, right? It's like the
Yeah,
greatest stories we know of,
these
one of the
archetypes,
things,
we
yeah,
know them.
yeah, we know them because it's a reflection of something that we have inside of us. And so the very best stories, we see ourselves in them because they're archetypal and because they have that powerful effect on the psyche. And that's how you know a great story, when you can do that.
Absolutely. And the third part, and this is what I think really kind of also is the grimoire aspect. One of the things I do want to point out is so many historical grimoires that we know of actually are stories to begin with. The
Right.
Keys of Solomon are about the testimony of Solomon. It's a story. The Black Pullet, it's a story. Um, uh, it's so fascinating that we kind of forget these small little aspects of the fact that many magics have been taught to us through story form. So in the very, very third section in the back, there's the grimoire, and there's again 13 chapters, specifically teaching you how to take the information and mold it into your own personal practice. It's very open-ended. Most things are very accessible, because it's about working with the landscape you're in, and then the spirits within the book that are now with you because you invited them in by reading them.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And so the book itself has a magical effect on the reader. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
That is amazing.
I want my readers to feel affected by
Yeah.
these stories, by the spirits within.
I love that. See, my goal when I'm teaching, when I'm writing, whatever I'm doing is, am I being clear and concise? I want you to understand. That's my driving passion. But I love that what you're doing is you want people to feel something, to be affected by it. It's so great. It's so great. You know, it makes me think of I don't know if you had these when you were a kid, but there's a series of books, the ology books. So there's dragonology and wizardology.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh
I
yeah.
recently bought all of those because they're out of print now. And I grabbed up all of them that I could, and I read them to my son at bedtime. But like, I love those books. Are so good. They're so inspiring because they have the maps and all the little things in there, and the poetry and the artwork and the bits that look like they're handwritten, and it just, man, it just does something to me. I love it. It's incredible. And your book very much has the same effect.
Thank you. It's interesting. The artwork was something that I really wanted to have control over. I did, like as you said, I self-published. I really struggled with that idea, but in the end, I felt that there is absolutely no way I can. This book is so personal. These words are so personal, and you know what? An editor may not have changed or taken any control away, but I was too afraid and I didn't want to risk it. And I wanted all the art to be mine, the cover to be my choice. I've spoken to so many authors in the past who are just like, yeah, this is my book. I didn't choose the cover, but you should read it. And you know, there are a couple publishers who just like to keep picking the same artists for covers over and over and over again that aren't my super faves. So I have a very, very large collection of ideas when it comes to my writing. And this is the first book in a series. I've been thinking about this incessantly for several years now. And I have plans for something that is going to be part of a collection. And that means that I'm creating ties sometimes together years before they'll be read or seen or experienced by our community. And that means making sure that I'm implementing them from day one. And some of them I didn't know I was even implementing from day one until I've been writing the second book, which is coming out in October. And I'm realizing, oh, this is the perfect, oh, no wonder this character fits so perfect right here, because they were always meant to be a part of the story. And that was something that had to be within my control.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you just said also, this is something that is difficult to transmit about magic that people need to understand. You know, if you want to be successful in your magical practice, and by the way, you know, my goal, my aim in life is to make as many people successful within their magical practice as possible. That's what I want for literally everybody, to realize that they have more agency in life than maybe it seems like. Now, what you just said is so important because I've experienced that as well. And when you get into that magical way of existing and thinking, what's going to happen is that your subconscious will feed you ideas and you won't understand why, but you have faith. And so you get these ideas from either your subconscious or from spirit or from, you know, wherever your inspiration is coming from. And maybe you don't fully understand it, but you know that it's something you're supposed to do. And then you follow through with it and see what happens. Right. And now this is a way that I think is not standard thinking for people. They're going to have an idea, plan it all out, and then, you know, have the ending in mind before they even get started. And I feel like that never works out the way you want it to.
No, that's so true. And in fact, several of these stories literally started with an inspired vision in my own mind, or like a dream, or just a small paragraph that I wrote. And my friend Olivia, I send her almost everything, and it's so crazy because I'll be like, hey, can I send you something that came to me last night? I wrote it late at night, and I want to see what your thoughts are. And so, like, I'll send her this paragraph and she's just like, oh my God, I've got to know more. And I will end up realizing there is a story here. I just now have to figure out what the rest of it is. So I actually have. I was opening my I have my new book, I have proof of my new book, The Red Mother, here, coming out October 1st. And I thought maybe I could read you that paragraph that was slightly
Yeah.
reworked that ended up inspiring this entire story. You have called, Red Witch, said the man in black, and I have answered. I seek your guidance and aid, she said with her mind, her words echoing. I have met a lady with a tale and a task. I can see a malady in her mind, yet I cannot see her fate. The spirit's robes misted out at the edges like watercolors swirling in the air. Her body is not long for this world, but her spirit dances fervently within. There is a great gift she is to bestow, a sacrifice willingly made, they said. Teach her the transformative magic of nodding threads, a work of art only you can bestow. One day, she will know when her time has come, and her end will save the lives of countless others. With her final words, the spirit let go of the red thread, and she found herself swiftly drifting back off the ground and into the blackness of the starry sky.
That was fantastic. You got to
It,
do an audiobook where you read it yourself. You have a wonderful speaking voice.
I've been trying to do that on my own, but it's been really hard. My mom's partner has transformed his office into like a little music recording studio, but when it's hard for me to get over there very often. And after 2 hours of speaking, man, your voice gets hoarse.
Yeah, I bet. But that was beautiful. So, okay, so tell me about that story. What were just tell me all about it.
Sure, sure. So this is actually kind of exciting because it's the first time I'm getting the opportunity to talk more about the Red Mother, the next book and the Cunning Words collection. Um, this story is inspired actually as a second half, or I should say, another part of the first story called The Three Wise Healers. In my first book, Cunning Words, there's a story called Three Wise Healers, and I actually wrote it a year and a half. Sorry, I wrote a charm a year and a half beforehand that ended up inspiring that story. So I'm watching these collections of thoughts come first,
Yeah.
and then the story comes afterwards, and it's something that's so touching to me. So the Three Wise Healers started with it was inspired by an old healing charm, old cunning charm. Three angels came from the east. Two brought frost, one brought fire. Out fire, in frost, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. It was an old cunning charm to help get rid of a burn, and they would speak it over a burn, and it would bring in the power of the angels or kings or magi, whichever rhyme you had learned. And something about that stuck with me, and I saw this picture. Um, it's a famous picture of three women wearing red, black, and white, holding red, black, and white foxes. And I don't know, there was just something so magical about it. I started like instantly kind of making a rhyme about it. And it turned into the charm, which became the Three Wise Healers. Um, there once were three wise healers, one with hair as red as blood, one as black as a raven, and one as hair as flax. The first one healed your wounds, the second took your pain, and the third made you whole again. And it was a small charm that involved invoking these spirits, these three wise healers, and using their power to heal a wound, an internal injury, something that you needed healing for, and it would be something I would chant over the actual wound itself, over a headache, or do distance work with a target, with a taglock, a picture, or whatnot, and then three candles, one red, one black, one white. And so I had this spell, and I built this story around it. That ended with a midwife who ended up being a very small side character making a intense sacrifice. But we didn't know her. We didn't know her story. And so when I wrote The Red Mother, I knew that the midwife had a story. And I wanted to give that story. And this was the first thing that came to me, knowing that her end would be a sacrifice and she was going to die. I knew that. We already knew that in the story. But why? Where did she come from? What was her purpose? How did this come to be? And the first thing that came to me was this passage about the man in black letting her know, letting the Red Witch know her body is not long for this world, but her spirit dances fervently within. And I feel like that's something that many of us sometimes feel at different points in our lives when we feel defeated. when
Yeah.
we feel like we're at the end of our rope, when we're sick, when we're old, when we as people get to a point where we know our body is finite,
Yeah.
but our spirit still dances fervently within all of us. That was so important to me, and I think I believe that will touch people in a way that they feel seen.
Yeah, I agree. That's so important. And I could go off on a tangent about death for an hour very easily, about the negative relationship that we have with death in the Western society, the way it's affected me personally and inspired my practice. But like that's a whole other episode we could do. But
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, but that to give people that little nugget of, you know what, maybe death isn't the enemy, maybe it's not the worst thing, maybe it's just this inevitable thing that happens to everybody, and there's ways in which you can embrace it and not be so fearful, which would tremendously improve your mental health, like instantly, for so many people. And I think that you touch on that right there within that little bit of the story, is that, you know, there is something beyond this. I believe that with every fiber of my being, because I've experienced it already.
Mhm.
You know, but without any, if you were raised like I was, let's say, to be devoutly atheist, that idea messes you up, that like that's it. One day
Mhm.
you're gonna die, and then that's it. There's nothing beyond that, and there's no such thing as spirit. That is such a deeply disheartening and disturbing point of view.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. I think one of the things that, especially as someone who might have been an atheist at some point, or who still is, or who feels that way now and is listening, um, you don't have to know what is going to happen to know that something might,
Yeah,
um, or to think something might, or to wonder if something might. I do not identify as an atheist, but at the same time, I don't pretend to know what's going to happen to me when I die.
totally.
I don't try to actually spend a lot of time with conjecture about it. It's one of those things where like I cannot prove to you, and you can't prove to me exactly what's going to happen, if there's a heaven, if there's a hell,
Yeah.
um, what part of us remains behind, if and when like ghosts or spirits
Mhm.
make contact with us. I will not pretend to say that I know what that is or what it might be. But that's okay, because I don't have to. That's not my
Yeah.
purpose here in this lifetime.
Yeah, and it's fun to speculate about, right?
Oh, it's fun to speculate,
Yeah,
absolutely. But I won't pretend like I know, because I feel like some
yeah,
people, if they get out of the realm of atheism, then they have to know what it is. They have to prove what it is. If you
right.
can't prove what it is, then it's nothing. And I'm like, no, I don't need to know. It's okay.
Yep. And that way of thinking, you see a person go from being an atheist to suddenly maybe having a kind of spiritual awakening, and becoming interested in all this, but because of that need to know,
Mhm.
that sets you up to become the prey of a cult, or of just another a
Absolutely.
religion telling you, we've got all the answers, here you go, we can prove blah blah blah. And then, you know, they get brainwashed, and they're listening to some guru tell them a bunch of nonsense like it's objective truth. And gosh, do I really despise that so much. I
It
think it's
fills
great to
that
not know.
hole. Yeah,
Yeah,
it fills that hole of certainty
yeah,
that what some people think that they need to always have
yeah.
answers for.
And they never have it. You never have that, right? Our entire reality is so subjective. Everything you think you know, like we don't know jack shit. We don't know fucking anything about anything. We don't know what we are or what we're doing here or what any of this is. You know, it's, but like to be comfortable with that, I think that is the realm of true, I would say true spirituality, or being, or magic, or just being on that side of reality where you are engaged with this stuff, to get to that point where you're comfortable knowing that you don't know jack shit, is wonderful and beautiful and inspiring, and it makes me so much more comfortable with life, because I don't know what happens when we die, but I'm excited to find out. Not in any kind of a morbid way, right? I want to be here for a very long time, but I'm not afraid of it. I think there's going to be some kind of adventure is what's coming next.
Well, I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And if not, you know, just whatever it is, we're gonna find out. And there's nothing terrifying about that inherently. You know, certainly I wouldn't want to depart this realm earlier than before I finish the things that are important to me to do, or see my son graduate, stuff like that. But otherwise, you know, I've had so many experiences now, in the realm of mediumship, and even I've been able to speak to my own father, who passed away when I was 12. So there's just not a lot of doubt there for me, but I don't know what it is, right?
Hmm.
But excited to find out.
Yeah, it's like a mystery door.
Yeah, exactly. So where, what about your practice or what led up to you deciding to write this book and the way you wrote it, and what were the core ideas that you were trying to transmit?
Well, a huge part of the book itself is very queer in the first place. I am a gay man. I came out at age 13. I'm 37 now. I went through a full 10 years of my life, kind of doing the whole atheist thing. I'd say my 20s, got back into spirituality in my 30s. Um, it was interesting. I felt like the more I got into traditional witchcraft and reading folklore, and um, there seemed to be, honestly, there's a lot of heteronormativity in a lot of things. But I felt like there's a queerness that is inherent to witchcraft, a liminality, an oddness,
Mhm.
an otherness that exists. Not, and I don't just mean like gay. I just mean I mean a full-on
Yeah.
otherness, and that includes my gayness, and I mean that literally. There is something that attracts me to that witchery, if you will, because I've always been othered. I had no choice but to be othered. I was othered before I knew I was other, and that's something that was put upon me before I learned even these stories. And is while there is a lot of history of myths and mythos that goes far, far back that includes queer stories, there wasn't in the time of witchcraft as much, especially when it comes to the formation of traditional witchcraft, which kind of built alongside of Wicca during the mid 1900s. Which is inspired by folklore. It's inspired by witch trials. It's inspired by records and stories of the land and cunning folk, and that changes upon your area. You know, so as I was trying to get more into my own local land spirits and my own stories, and I own a condo, I live in the neighborhood of my city in Texas. I'm surrounded by queerness at all times. My building was built in 1985, and a lot of people died here during the AIDS crisis.
Mm.
So I am just enriched and drenched with queerness at all times where I am, and I love it and I revel in it. But I wasn't seeing it in our stories.
Right.
I wasn't reading it in a way that was affirming, full of joy, included our pain and rage and gave voice to that rage. There are a couple stories in there that are absolutely revenge fantasies, and I think that that is something that heals queer rage. There's literally patricide, but you'll have to read it to find out which one it is. Um, I feel like it was an outlet for that queer rage. It was an opportunity to give voice to so many people who haven't had their stories told. I grew up reading lots of books that were required reading, stories that I loved, books that just told me romances and fantasy and horror, but
Mhm.
so rarely were they queer. So rarely were the main characters gay or bisexual or transgender, asexual. So rarely did I get them without it being a plot point and just existing.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
we're here. And while we do have trauma, that doesn't always have to be the forefront of our presentation. And so there is some of those things in there, but there's also just the experience of existing, because it's a mixed bag, and we all got baggage.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I think what you just said is so important because I mean, okay, I'm gonna try and phrase this correctly. So when a person's suffering or what they've been through becomes the very obvious point that they're trying to make with reading, it takes you out of that sort of engagement with the book, and where you're one with it, for that time that
Mhm.
you're reading it. And that's why I think when you just blend these things in so seamlessly and they're just a part of the story, then it's so natural and it's so good. But when it's clearly the point of the story, that has its place as well, and it can be very important. But for me, it takes me out of the story, right? And so what I think that you're saying and what is so important is to have stories that have that quality of engagement, where you have that queerness and where stories are being told of, like you said, of the trans people and gay people and asexual people and everybody who's out of the realm of what is considered to be straight and normal, which is a religious thing, right? That's don't even get me started on religion.
Oh,
But there's so much in there that's not just heteronormative, but like, don't be neurodivergent, don't wear these clothes. There was a time in history where there were musical scales that you couldn't play, you're going to get burned at the cross. Everything that's outside of that box was considered evil or witchcraft, and queerness and witchcraft. So in that way, queerness and witchcraft are very much the same thing. It's anything outside of that box.
absolutely. I mean, gay and witch are two things that you will always find at some point in history at the end of an accusatory finger.
Yes, exactly. Right. It's like, no, these are the worst things you can be.
Absolutely. And that, I mean, I'm a child of the 90s. I was born in the 80s. Like, that was the insult of my childhood.
Yeah.
And eventually when I came out in high school, it was kind of funny because, they would try to use it as an insult. And I was just like, yeah, I am. What? And they just it really kind of sucked all the power out. And it was so crazy because the very people who throughout my childhood would make fun of me, call me names, just, walk by and scream the F slur. Now that I was taking ownership of it, now that I was like, yeah, I am. I mean, I had a boyfriend in my sophomore year. I put pictures of us like literally kissing on my binder because that was back when binders, I'm not sure if they still do. You could put little like things in the cover, and it was so crazy because they'd be like, oh my God, you're kissing. Oh, that's gross. Hey, get over here. Look at this. And like it created this sense of interestingly enough, they knew a gay person now.
Yeah.
It changed their reality from starting from a place where gay was othered to I know someone gay.
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating watching them because sometimes, especially privately, they would ask me questions.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yep.
would be like, how did you know you were gay? Or like, how did you meet your boyfriend? And some of them got a little invasive and some of them I didn't care. But at the same time, it was one of those things where the thing that separated me all of a sudden became the thing that they were so ignorant about, but they found a place that they may be able to learn something about it. And I'm grateful that it was me. For some of those people, I know some of them I eventually helped come out, sort of a little bit. I'm not going to take full credit because that's everyone's individual story, and everyone has that story. But it was definitely one of those things where it was a complete and utter shift taking ownership of my queerness. And I'm grateful to be privileged enough to not only have survived it, but eventually been able to thrive with it.
Yeah. No, okay, so man, so much of what you just said. So being on the outside of that, so I'm a couple years older than you. So we were in high school, we would have been in high school at the same time. I watched that happen from my side of it, right? And
Hmm.
it was so inspiring to me because I'm weird. I'm a weird. I was always like, there's nothing specifically weird about me. I was just like, that kid's weird. Why is that kid
Yeah.
so right? And I didn't know why either. I'm interested in different stuff. I want to dress differently. I'm, a very, like I said, very, very ADHD. I couldn't pay attention in school. I was a musician. I hung out with all the drama kids. It was just, but I always just do what I want. I don't care at all what other people think. And I never have. Right. I care because it hurts me, but I'm not going to change my behavior. I'm going to be me no matter what. So, when I was in high school, I watched exactly what you were just talking about. I watched people go from using that word as an insult to being like, these are our friends. These are our friends and they're important to us, right? And
Hmm.
it was so amazing and inspiring. And that thing that happened, number one, thank you for being a part of it. I think that it took a lot of brave people to do exactly what you did to create this change. But in my mind, I'm thinking this was happening at the same time in high schools all over America, all over the world, where there's this shift happening because people like you were standing up and saying, yeah, so what? I'm gay. What? Right. And then that's what creates the shift, because without that, it would just continue to just be an insult because people don't understand.
Yeah. We in the American language specifically, I don't speak a lot of other languages, so I don't want to speak for any others, but we have a way of taking the disenfranchised and making the title of them or their experience a slur. It's horrifying. And it's one of I think personally it's one of the reasons why I actually love that we're using the word queer now, because we have reclaimed it from being such. It's such a beautiful word. It's so all encompassing. It's so inclusive. It includes that weirdness, that strangeness, that otherness, but also makes it to where, one, you don't have to spout off the entire alphabet mafia, LGBTQIA plus, which does sometimes become a mouthful. But it kind of also gives you the freedom to recognize within yourself that, you know what, I'm not sure where I fall on this yet. I'm
Yeah.
still discovering myself, but I
Yeah.
know I'm queer.
I do also believe personally, this is just a personal belief,
Sure.
that the more labels we put on things, the easier they are to other, rather than saying I am queer,
Sure.
I'm a human being. Right. And that's not to say that these labels aren't also important, but it's so important to have that human aspect to it. Right. And so I think that some of those terms get, you hear people use them as if you're not talking about people. Like they're talking about, well, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but it doesn't sound like you're talking about people.
Well, I mean, like literally, there's a huge difference when saying, and I'm going to use this about my own self. If someone were to say something and they're talking about those gays,
Right.
it's very easy to use that terminology in a dehumanizing way.
Yeah, totally.
It's another way of saying, like, well, gay people have this instance happen to them a lot. That in itself, I know it's a small, it's a linguistic aspect of, and technically in the definition of what I am saying, there may be no difference, but the way in which it sometimes can humanize, and personally, I say gays all the time. And when I do it, I'm talking about us as a collective. The context always matters, but there is a way in which the context and the language we use within it can take away the human aspect and just make them the label. I do understand what you're saying, because absolutely everything that exists has to have a word to describe it.
Yeah.
It has to exist, but at the same time, we are more than those labels. We are
Yes.
humans.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're a multitude of labels, which goes into intersectionality, which is a whole larger conversation of experience.
Yes. So yeah, the labels I think are important. I know this also could just because I'm old, but I'm watching the younger. So in my, when you and I were in high school, it was like fuck all the labels, stop labeling yourself. That was like the movement, was to get rid of labels. And now with Gen Z, they're like they love labels, and so I'm like, no, you're undoing all the work we did.
Progression always progresses and it's always evolving. And what once was actually super progressive eventually can sometimes to later generations become and feel regressive. I know
Totally.
when don't ask, don't tell part of our military was put in place by Bill Clinton, he put that in place as a progressive move,
Yeah, but
because before that, it was like Section 8, you're gay, you found out, you're discharged. Putting don't ask, don't tell in place was, we can't ask you and you don't have to tell us. Um, the thing is it eventually got twisted, it eventually got loopholed, it eventually be like, oh, we found you out. Oh, you posted a picture. Oh, you're married. They're publicly stating it. It eventually became regressive and
yeah.
it was dropped. So there are many things, words we use that we no longer use because they're regressive, when at one point they were considered an evolution of an older one.
Yeah.
There's so many things that's going to happen to a lot of us. And I totally see what you're talking about here. But like I said, progression will continue progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll get better and better and better and things improve. And within improvement, there's always like, oh, maybe that's not, it doesn't just move in one way. It's like
We're
two
fiddling.
step back for fiddling.
We're
Exactly. Right.
fiddling.
Yeah, but I love it. And I want to see, and I want everyone else to see every human being as a fucking human being, as a person that you can connect to and have a conversation with. And, hopefully, um, a huge part of the reason I do this show and run my school and everything I do is to try and alleviate some of the mental health epidemic. I'm not a mental health professional, but I'm not a doctor in any way, shape, or form. But, I was a horrifically depressed kid all throughout my 20s. There was a period when I was like 26 ish where I took a fistful of pills prescribed by the doctor every single day. And I'd also want to clarify right now that I'm not anti-pharmaceutical in any way, shape, or form. Some of those pills absolutely saved my life at the time. But when I dove deeply into my spiritual and magical practice, it fixed so much of me. And I feel so much more myself and so much more complete now. And I want other people to have that same experience, however it takes shape for them.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where we all find that thing that we become so passionate about, that brings us so much, that can turn that feeling around, that brings us joy. Sometimes it's in tandem with therapy, sometimes it's in tandem with pharmaceuticals or a psychiatrist.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's not needed. Everyone is going to come from a different place. So I can totally see how your perspective of offering that place for people to build their own practice, to learn and to expand in their magic, in their craft, would be a great way to touch them and fill that space.
Yeah. Well, like you were saying with the kids asking you questions, you
Yeah.
what I truly believe is that what we consider to be neurotypical, I like to say neurotypical is a myth.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
it is.
so what we perceive to be neurotypical and quote unquote normal, that box is so very small, not very many people are going to fit in it. Not very many at all. And then so you have this whole world of people who are like, wait, it's okay to stop pretending like we're in the box? Like really? And then they're gonna be so inspired, and it's gonna inspire them because they don't fit in the box. They're just trying to shove themselves in there so badly. And yeah, I want to see people escape the box.
It's so funny. This is kind of, I promise this is connected, but when I started growing my hair out for the first time and I'd wash it,
Mhm.
I always got this clump of natural shed hair in my butt crack. And I was just like, hold on. This is something that's happening. We all shed. This is something that happens every single time we brush or wash our hair every day. I'm a hairstylist. I know these things. And I'm just like, this happens every time I wash my. Is this happening to everyone with long hair when they wash it? It's getting stuck in their butt crack. And I started asking like my friend, like my girlfriends, I was like, when you wash your hair, does it kind of, do you have to like pick a little shed clump out of your butt? And she was just like, yes. And I was just like, why is no one talking about this? And I think that these really, really like normal things are happening to a lot of us, not just hair and butt crack, but a lot of these feelings, these otherness. We're all experiencing these things, and sometimes we're not talking about them because we feel like we shouldn't. Like we're not supposed to talk about the hair shedding, getting caught in our butt crack. But I was like, why is no one saying this? Like nobody. And once I brought it up in the break room at work, we all started laughing because I work with a lot of girls.
Mhm.
All of us are having this experience, and it was this kind of unifying moment, a
Yeah.
sisterhood. I don't know. It was one of those things that I think we can apply in a larger scale to a lot of the experiences and feelings we have.
Yes, right. And I think what you're getting at is people is connecting on a human level
Yeah,
rather than because we've evolved into this thing that is there's
stripped
this
of
cerebral
niceties.
aspect. Yeah, this cerebral aspect of at least the cultures that I'm accustomed to living in. So I've lived in America and now I've been in Canada for almost a decade, and there's not a whole lot of difference. But the lack of human connection or the way that people are afraid of it, I would say, afraid to
But,
talk about things like that. There's
yeah, I grew up in the South. I'm in Texas. I grew up going cotillion, as every good standing person in my town did. We had manners lessons, dancing lessons, and then a final actual like bald slash dance at the end of it. And every single one of my classmates went, not every single one, but majority that I remember. That was standard where I live. Social niceties. How can I put this? A lot of people in the South are nice but not kind.
yeah, that's true of a
And
lot of people in Canada too. We're
there
not we are not the nice, polite people people think we are. Oh my God. Canadians are
it's
ruthless.
it is one of those things where the standard of order and expectation takes precedent amongst a lot of families, especially in the suburbs. And the way in which many of us are breaking those cycles and dropping some of the things that are absolutely expected of you as part of social niceties.
Mhm.
Um, we're seeing this with a huge shift. I mean, feminism has been growing and growing and growing for decades, but we're seeing a massive shift right now of so many women just absolutely putting their foot down and refusing to take any part in a society that's going to tell them what they can and cannot do. We're seeing a slide, I don't want to say a slide back, but almost like the Dow pendulum swinging the entire opposite way with a resurgence of the trad wife aspect. And we're seeing this polarization happen all over again because of this. And it's so fascinating as we're watching our generations start taking steps that our previous generations maybe didn't feel they had the power to yet.
Yeah. Yep.
We're seeing a backlash to that, I think, not to get too deep into politics, but witchcraft is also political. That's indistinguishable. We're seeing these backlashes in our society to the rebellion of these niceties, these expectations of what we're supposed to be, of, men don't cry, men don't show emotions, men are masculine. And it's like, that's actually toxic. Masculinity is not toxic. Masculinity can be a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's the expectations and repression putting upon men that are the toxic part. We are seeing this reclaiming of what is masculine, what is feminine, the strength in femininity, the rage in femininity. It is something that is, again, so intersectional. I love that we are breaking these cycles, but I look back, it's so crazy. I'm literally reading this book, Slewfoot, right now, which is taking place in the 1600s New England during the Puritan era. And I'm reading this book as this woman, Agatha, is dealing with the real life punishment of not adhering to social niceties. And I just want to tell her to grab a shovel and bang this guy's head in. But obviously, that wouldn't have worked out very well for Agatha. But I see that we are so breaking away from a society that has legal reinforcement.
Yeah.
That they're literally trying to reinforce it back again in certain stances.
Yeah, they really
It
are.
is.
Yeah.
We're trying to break those cycles. We're trying to say social niceties will not stop me from speaking my truth anymore. There's an authenticity that we're starting to live, and that is very humanizing. That is hard to segregate people from their humanity when you see them as a human. You take away the social niceties and you take away the social structure that gives the people with privilege at the top the most privilege. A lot of people don't like that when they feel like others might be raised up to their level. They need to know the pie is big enough for us all.
Yep. They do. And so much of that, comes from religion. And there are things about religion that I really appreciate. I'm not saying that I think religion is a bad thing. My brother is religious. I have many religious people in my life. However, there's this modern idea in religion that you can just take everything that's good about these stories and say they're great and we're going to be religious, and then as well ignore all the stuff that the other things that are part of that, and you can't, right? It's still there, and so they end up embodying it without acknowledging it, right? And I've seen people who were important people in my life go from being more progressive to more conservative, and see them all of a sudden have a disdain for gay people. And I'm like, what is happening to you? What the fuck is this? I don't get it. So
there's a pushback, and in Taoism, the pendulum always swings, and the further it swings one way, the more the opposition is going to try to swing it back the other. I think that's life. I think we're seeing that a lot right now in our society.
The life thing, like you were saying, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Seeing progressive people suddenly adopt religion, and I'm like, what? Why? Not to say that you shouldn't seek out spirituality. I really believe that people should if they choose to. That it's a wonderful experience, but like, why that one? Why that institution in particular, which is demonstrably responsible for so much genocide and so much child abuse and so much, oh my god, so many terrible things.
Yeah, I got away from the church a while ago. In fact, Wicca was my first movement away that embraced my femininity when the church told me my femininity was something I needed to hide.
Right.
It was something that it was like spoke to me on a spiritual level that said, you are not only okay like this, you are celebrated like this. You are celebrated for who you are. It was a spirituality that touched me in a way that I grew with. And while I'm no longer Wiccan, I don't identify as such. I was never initiated into a coven or like traditional Gardnerian anyway. I don't want to take that or claim that. But it was the 90s Wicca books, as we all know, the Scott Cunningham, the Raymond Buckland, the Silver Raven Wolf, and it was my first foray away from the church that gave me that sense of authenticity and spirituality in one, and I loved it. What's so fascinating now I got very anti-church for a very long time. And to this day I kind of still am, but at the same time, I've also had the privilege of getting to know a lot of folk practitioners who are
Mhm,
Catholic,
mhm,
folk practitioners who do magic on a regular basis. I've got to speak with a lot of American brujeria practices or
mhm.
practitioners. I've spoken to a lot of these people who are introducing literally historical church aspects back into magic. Not even back into magic. It's always been there.
Always
I
been there.
just have been.
Yes.
It's always been there. I just been separated from it. I didn't read about it. I didn't know about it. And it was one of those things where I started not only allowing it back in, but allowing room for the mysticism
Hmm. Yeah.
to
Yes.
creep back in, and not so much the evangelism, not well,
Yeah.
none of the evangelism,
Yeah.
but the mysticism, the magic. These are myths and stories that hold magic just like any other myth and
Totally.
story.
Totally.
um
I
and
actually
that
talk
was
about the Bible in the Living
yeah.
Witchcraft course. There's deep mysticism and symbolism in the Bible. I mean, and when you look at it as mythology,
Hmm.
number one, oh God, okay, a little short tangent, but people, people who are devoutly religious tend to get offended when you refer to the Bible as mythology. But I'm like, no, 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 no. You don't understand how beautiful mythology is. And this is a compliment.
Mm.
And this is a wonderful thing because mythology is a superior way of transmitting information if you can tune into it, right? It's better because you'll actually remember it. Because you'll remember a story. You're not going to remember a textbook, but you will remember a story. And if the information is transmitted in that story in a way that is relatable and beautiful, then you're of course you're going to remember it. And that's what the Bible is. Parts of it, anyway. Um, so I'm working on a paper right now called Quantum Mythology, where I'm talking about all this stuff, the importance of mythology and its relationship to science and its relationship to reality. So anyways, I just think that these stories, that mythology is so incredibly important, and when you can look at it that way and not be offended by it, you've got the key now you know how to read the book, you know how to open the door, you know what it's saying, rather than anybody. And I think this is true of any practice, any spirituality. When you take it hyper literally, you're getting it wrong.
Oh yeah, the hyper literate. Oh my God, I still remember having conversations with people throughout my lifetime about them saying that they take the Bible literally. And
Yeah.
it kind of, in my opinion, it kind of shuts down conversation, because if it's being taken literally, nothing I say is going to matter.
Right.
There's no reason to argue, or I mean, honestly, I'm not going to argue with someone about their religion, but like, there's no reason to have any sort of discussion or about your perspective on it, because it doesn't matter to them.
Doesn't matter.
That is a
Now
hard.
yeah. Now they're
That's a
sure that they know the truth and that it's objective and that you have to believe it too, or you're a bad person. I'm like, that's
mhm.
bonkers that you think that. That's so crazy in so many different directions for so many reasons. It's yeah. And then it removes the mysticism, like you were saying. And when you do that, what's interesting is that Catholicism is deeply occult. It is so occult. You go to church service, or like a proper Catholic church service, that is the most, you're in this incredible occult space with candles everywhere, and there's magic happening all around you. And they're like, no, 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 this is, this is objective, it's real, this isn't magic, don't look at it that way. And then even develop sort of a distaste for anything occult. But I'm like, what? But that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing in there. You're doing the same things we do. You're just doing it in a group.
Oh yeah, I would definitely say there's a huge amount of magic and mysticism in both Catholicism and Protestantism, in different ways, of course.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy once you take some time to actually learn about the history of, the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
the shift between emperors from a lot of Roman paganism and Roman mythology into monotheism. When you learn about those histories, why those things shifted, the way it was in some points about a consolidation of power under one emperor,
Yeah.
one god, one emperor, one god to put one emperor on the earth to control everything and everyone. When you learn about a lot of these histories, you can see how it's so clear the way that paganism evolved, that way that ceremonialism evolved, the way that worshiping the sun god Apollo slowly turned to worshiping the sun. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't mean the sun is in the sky, I mean the sun is in the Son of God. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we see these histories. Now, I'm not saying that that's literally what happened in a succinct string of events, but they were synchronicities that slowly happened through lots of either migration, through colonization, through conversion, sometimes willing, sometimes not. There was a lot of willing conversion, and I want people to remember that um, when we actually talk about our history. It's a mixed bag. It's not all one thing.
Yeah, that's very important. Yeah, and that's very true. And I think that we have a tendency to look at history in very black and white terms. And of course, nothing in reality is actually black and white. Never,
Of
never
course.
has been, never will be. But this kind of leads me to an interesting topic I
Mhm.
want to get into is that you're going to be teaching a guest workshop in our Living
Yes.
Witchcraft course this month. And your workshop is on narrative magic and the old ones. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're planning for that course. But first, let me show you this because I stayed up all night working on this because I couldn't sleep. But yeah, this is I'm gonna post this later today. Can you see that?
Oh wow. Yeah.
Okay, so here, let me play the whole thing.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, super happy with this. I love the way
Oh, that's wonderful.
we put music to it and all that. But yeah, I'm so the point is I'm so excited to have you teaching a guest spot. This is gonna be
I am
awesome.
too. Yeah, I'm really excited. The old ones are a such a mysterious, and I don't want to give away too much, but I do want to talk just a little bit so people know what they're getting a taste of. The old ones are such a mysterious collection, if you will. I've seen them referred in multiple witchcraft books, and a lot of times this might be in traditional witchcraft or folkcraft as the Witch King and Queen. It could be a god and goddess, a horned god and a moon goddess. It could be a little bit more into the concept of the devil of the land. Not necessarily specifically all the way into Luciferianism and Satanism, but more so the aspect of the folkloric devil.
Right.
And in a lot of traditional witchcraft, the folkloric devil is the initiator, the gatekeeper, the opener of the door to magic, and the witch queen or goddess or witch mother is the other side of that door, the intangible, the magic. And I have built within my own practice a representation of this that speaks to me in a way that creates this court of the old ones. I wrote about it in my first book. I have a lot more to say about it and expand upon it in my second and maybe more third and fourth. But it takes you into well, let me rephrase. It takes you away from this concept of a god and a goddess. It's away from this concept of a male and a female. I want to make sure it's very clear there is absolutely feminine and masculine energies here, but they are intermingling, they are intertwining, they are experiential, and we all have those aspects within us in a spectrum of ways. And
Yes.
that's how they present to me in the old ones. It is a collection of spirits that start with absence, literally nothing. The nothingness of the void is something that we cannot comprehend. Even thinking of a black background in your brain when you just sort of shut everything off is still something.
Yeah.
We can't fathom it. It is beyond us. It is the first old one. It's followed by existence, which is the first spark of time beginning, the first everything, and existence is all encompassing. It's the opposite of the void and absence. Followed by that is desire, and she's the witch queen, the witch mother. She's the creatrix. I call her the creatrix, the creativity, the thing that pushes the want, the desire, the need for more, to build, to make, to destroy. It's the chaos, that energy of tapping into non-physical. You can't touch it, but you can feel it, you can experience it. And then you finally get to physicality. That's where you get the man in black, the witch king, the devil of our land, the folkloric devil. There's lots of names for these beings, which is why it's so easy to collectively call them the old one.
Mm-hmm.
This is the class that I want to create more experiences with. I want to talk about them. I want to get them on your mind. I want to get them on your lips. I want to get them in your practice. They are ginormous and horrifyingly beautiful spirits to work with. And I want to talk more about them.
I'm so excited for this. Oh my gosh. Yeah, awesome. Oh my God. Okay. That's gonna be great. So again, if you want to join us for this course, the link is in the description. Marshall, that's about all the time we've got, but thank you so much for being here. This has been, we're gonna have to do this again because I feel like we talked about a lot of things and there's
Oh yeah,
way, way, way more to keep going on about.
absolutely. We can totally do this again. Thank you for having me. Like I said before, I love being able to have these conversations, and I hope we've been able to inspire people to want to jump in.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I mean, that's what it's all about for me. I want to proliferate magical, not a religion, not a system, I don't want you to believe what I believe. That's not what we're about. I just want you to have an experience that's transcendent. You know, I want people to have understanding that they are more powerful than our mainstream society would have them believe.
Absolutely. Affected. You want them to feel affected.
Yeah, I do. I love that. All right, Marshall, thank you so much, and I will see you there. Bye, everybody.